Hey guys, welcome back to the Men of Iron podcast. Today we are talking about legacy. This is part of our Fatherhood series. So we're talking about legacy, but in the context of what it means to be a father and really what you want your fatherhood legacy to be. So I think maybe the first place to start would be Colton.
Yeah.
What do you think about this whole legacy situation?
Man, it's so crucial. I think that everybody has one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's so important to point out that your legacy is, what you're leaving behind, what you're being remembered by. I can think of people that have been in my life and their legacy, and like what I remember them by that have passed on, and went home to be in heaven. It's like what their legacy was to me personally, you know what I mean? And how they like kept me, you know what I mean? Like, and like, they were like, they showed me the way. So I think legacy is such an important thing that it's actually, it kind of defines you at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like that you're pointing out that everybody has a legacy.
Yeah.
So if you're out there listening and you're like, well, I'm not even, I'm not a dad. Is Men of Iron saying that I'm not a dad, so I'm never going to have a legacy? No, that's not what we're saying. And it's important to recognize that you actually have a legacy whether you like it or not.
Yep.
No matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, you will leave a legacy. And a lot of times it has positive connotations.
Absolutely.
I would like to have a really good legacy. And it's worth thinking through that. Like, what are you leaving behind? And certainly we're not saying like, hey, if you're not a dad, you're not going to have one. That's very silly.
Yeah.
So every guy everywhere should be thinking through like, what is it that I'm going to leave behind? And you have a way of talking about this that I think is really interesting. Sometimes we can choose a legacy for ourselves that's a little bit weird or misplaced. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think we can think like our legacy is things we've done in our past that we hold on to so tightly.
Yeah.
And it was like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I could hold on to what I did in high school or college.
Yeah.
And now you're like 50 years old and that's what I remember as being my legacy. But I think what's so important is like those things come and go.
Yeah.
Like just because, just because you won that high school, tournament, like no one's remembering that at 50 years. So I think what's so important is like your legacy continues on past those, even the big moments in your life. Yeah. Like people are going to remember you from wherever you've gone, and all those things that I think it's so we get like misconstrued of like, well, this is a part of it. It may be a piece of it, but you can't look at it as that is my whole legacy.
Yeah, it's interesting because I identify with that because I fall into silly things. Like there's times where like, man, I had a really cool truck. Like I built a really cool truck. Actually, I don't think it was very cool at all, but I feel like it was pretty cool. And sometimes I think that's like, I identify with that silly thing. Yeah. That's actually probably like, I don't know, it might be melted down at this point. So it can be helpful to think through what kind of legacy you want to leave. And I actually think it's one of those things that can be helpful to think through on a regular basis. So like maybe once a year or maybe even once a month or something, you're thinking through like, okay, this is who I really want to strive to be. What did I do this month to hit that mark? Or what did I do this past year to hit that mark? Like if I want people to remember me this way, what am I doing to get there? And actually I think you talked about Anchored Man last week.
Yeah.
There's a thing in Anchored Man where, and this is probably not exclusive to Anchored Man, but there's a thing in there that talks about like, imagine, it's a little bit heavy. Imagine your funeral. And when people show up, first of all, will people show up?
Yep.
Who will show up? And then more importantly, what will they say?
Yeah.
And it's a little bit strange to think through, but it can actually be really helpful. And then you evaluate, what did I do this month to become that man?
Yeah.
Or what did I do this past year to strive to be that man?
Yeah.
And it's really helpful to actually think through those parts and pieces.
Man, that's so good. I think like as we're talking about legacy in itself, it's like, it's the choices you make.
Yeah.
Like if you really want to boil it down, it's the choices that I'm making on a daily basis that's forming that legacy. How I'm living my life, how I'm, am I reflecting the ultimate father in my marriage, in my family, to leave that legacy behind? Like, man, he was a great dad.
Yeah.
Because it's just really a reflection at the end of the day of that legacy that God showed me from the beginning.
Yeah.
Of how to love and how to care and how to, like, we talked about in our opening episode about that, like how it's so important. Like he said, his only son because of the love he has for us.
Yeah.
Like, and we just need to remember that, like, in that legacy piece is like, I'm just trying to reflect what God did for me.
Yeah.
Like, that's all I want to reflect. And that's the legacy I really want to do, is just point them back to God. Like, my legacy, I just want it to be a mirror.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, hey, I just want to point you to what Christ has done for me day in and day out.
It's funny, man. You think about legacy. When I was in my 20s, I worked at a retirement community. I was like a lawn crew.
Oh.
And this guy, actually working a lawn crew in a retirement community is a very interesting job. But one time I was mowing grass, and this guy came over to me. I hadn't really talked to him much before. I knew who he was, and he's like, "You're Joshua Zook's great grandson." And I was like, "No, I don't. I know my great grandparents. I don't have any grandparents named Joshua." He's like, "No, I know you are." And he's like, "You need to know that man was a faithful man who loved God, and he changed my life." Yeah. So this dude in this retirement home was talking to me about this relative that I had that changed his life. And so I actually didn't believe him. So I was like, dude, I'm not related to any Joshua Zook. So I went and talked to my grandpa. I was like, dude, this crazy old man stopped me and said that I was Joshua Zook's grandson. He's like, oh, that's actually like your great great grandfather. Wow. And he was very influential in this area. Many people came to be faithful people because of what he taught them. I didn't even know the guy.
That's so cool.
I'm like, man, what a legacy. What a powerful story that some guy is passionate enough to stop me, like a young guy that, man, I didn't know anything. Yeah. To tell me like, hey, I knew your grandfather and what he did for my life was important. Yeah. And it was pretty cool. Maybe I mixed up how many greats belong in there. I don't know exactly where he fits, but I know he was part of my family history, and I know he had a ton of influence. And that's actually my first son. His name is Joshua.
That's awesome.
Because I want to tell him that story about like, dude, it is a powerful thing when a man leaves a strong legacy that brings people to strong faith.
And that's for me too. Like, I'm about to be a dad.
Yeah, man.
Like, whew, like that's heavy in itself of like, what kind of legacy am I trying to leave my son? So like those conversations that you were able to experience. Yeah. Like, I remember your dad just doing X, whatever it may be, like, and I just wanted to be that I just pointed people back to Christ, that I could just love like Christ loved, like, and just have compassion. And I think those things is like, that's what we want our legacy to be made up of. And that's what I want for my son. Like, just to be able to say, like, I want to try to be like my dad, but at the end of the day, like, I'm just trying to be like God. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's how that works. And it's just so beautiful. Like, if at the end of the day, that's the goal, like, let it be it.
Dude, Paul says this thing that always makes me really mad. He says, follow me as I follow Christ. I'm like, what an arrogant thing to say. And sometimes Paul rubs me the wrong way anyway. I'm like, this guy's very overconfident. But it is interesting to think through like fatherhood legacy. Yeah. Like, if you can say to your son, follow me as I follow Christ, that's pretty powerful. Yeah. Without all the arrogance and overconfidence of Paul. But like, hey, like, I'm trying to do what I can to do a life that honors Christ. Because I'm trying to honor what God has called me to do. If we can set that example for our sons to follow, man, that's a powerful thing.
Yeah. And I think it's so good. Like, we can see it throughout the Bible time and time again, that how faithful God has been through the ages. And that's a piece of that legacy. Yeah. How he's been so faithful. I think of his promises that he just keeps continually in that legacy. I think I love, like, we just see it over and over in the Bible. And just like talking about it, I wrote this verse down, and I think it was kind of cool. Deuteronomy 6:6-7. And what it's really saying is, like, teach your children diligently. Yeah. And like, I want that to be a part of my legacy as well. Like, I taught my kids the word of God, no matter whatever it is. And it's so beautiful. It goes on here to say, like, talk to them and sit down with them in the house, walk beside them when you're talking to them, when they're going to sleep and when they rise. Like, that's so beautiful. Like, I just want it to be like Christ surrounds them and they can understand that because he did that the whole way through my life.
Yeah. All right, I want to get super pointed with you.
Come on.
Because we're in like a really cool situation where you're like expecting your first child. Yeah. So when you think about like tangible things, like it's easy to say, I want them to be like God. I want to follow Christ, like, and they can follow me. So when you think about like simple, tangible, I'm sure you're thinking through these things. Yep. What are things that you want to do, things that you want to be to set your newborn son up, really to leave a strong legacy? Like, what are the things you think about?
Man, I think about just keeping him in the body. Okay. The body of Christ is huge. Okay. I think sometimes we forsake that. There's a verse, it's in Hebrews, talks about it. Like, we forsake the assembling of ourselves together. We can't do that. Keep him in the body. Okay. You know, make him a body baby. We always talk about that at church. It's just so funny. Like, make him a body baby. Okay. I think keeping him around people that just have the same focus as I do, that what we're trying to reflect back.
So that means, like, specifically you're going to be prioritizing, like, get this kid to church.
Exactly.
Is that fair?
Yes. Very fair to say.
Okay. All right. What else?
I think also too, just reading them the word.
Okay.
Yeah. Get them to know God.
Okay.
You know, so he can see what I'm trying to strive after, and I can show him in the word where it is. And it may be simple at first, right? It may be like the stories of Jonah and Moses and like the simple pieces or Daniel that we can take away from the Bible that kids can relate with.
Yeah.
But I think it's so crucial that we just show glimpses of God to them so they can grab a hold of those things as they're growing up.
Oh, that's cool. All right, what else? Give me another thing.
Man, I think the other thing is really, and we're going to jump into this next week, so I don't want to go too deep into it, but like properly show how to love your wife.
Okay.
Because that right there, I think as a child, they're looking at you and you're following the ultimate example.
Yeah.
For that piece, though, I think which is so cool is what they're getting to experience love for the first time.
Yeah.
They're getting to watch you love. And I'm getting that love from Christ because that's my example.
Yeah.
And so for my son to be able to just look at that and that be his example of what love is, to be diligent in the word, like that's what I want to be shown to him. And that's what he's looking at. Like there's no other example for him except that's my dad.
All right. So to drill into this further and like totally just keep putting you on the spot.
Yeah, it's totally fine.
One of the nice things about expecting kids is that God decided it should take 9 months for them to get here. It's a great feature, really, that he planned it out that way. I'm sure there are things that you have maybe noticed in your own life or adjusted in your own life. You want to talk a little bit about that? Like, are there changes that you have made in your life to promote a stronger legacy with your newborn son?
Yeah, I think for me, really is important is I have a mentor.
Okay.
And my mentor has 3 kids. He runs a business. He's a super busy guy, but he raised 3 amazing children. He sits on at our church. He's on our board.
Okay.
But I chose him as a mentor because I saw him as, even though he had 3 kids, he still chased God.
Okay.
And then his kids are reflecting images of that day in and day out in our ministry. So for me, like picking a mentor is so crucial because now he's mentoring me like what I should expect as a father and what he did and how it worked and didn't work for him, right? Like there's always pros and cons to everything, but it was just so important for me like to have a mentor that's showing me like come alongside me and help. Because it's very like I was talking to my wife the other day. It's like we go to the hospital for 2 days, have the baby, and then it's like, here you go. Figure it out. Like it's like a crazy thing. Like
I told you this the other day. The worst I've cried my whole life is like I didn't cry at all when we had our first son. Yeah. And we walked out, like clicked him in that little baby seat, and I'm like ready to drive home. I'm like, oh my goodness, like I'm actually in charge of this thing. Like what am I gonna do? I bawl my eyes out.
Yep.
So you probably won't do that. I want to catch you though.
Yeah.
Okay, because you're saying you got a mentor.
Yeah.
You work for Men of Iron. Their thing is mentorship. This is probably just a product placement. Like tell me. Yeah. Like is that what's going on here, or is this like legit?
This is legit. I think what's so important about it is because I think with going into a new chapter of my life, I need someone that's a couple seasons ahead of me to be able to understand what I need to tackle. Okay. Because I think I could say, oh, I know it to this point. Now I'm flipping the page to something brand new. It's like, I need help. Yeah. And I think it's always important that we still, we're in our Bible, we're studying, but it's always something different about someone coming alongside you that has experienced that. Yeah. And that's why it's so important for me personally, that just to have that in my life.
All right. So you've introduced a mentor into your life. Is there anything else?
Yeah. I think for me also too, it's just to stay in the word. Okay. I think sometimes we can get away from it a little bit, like I'm getting so busy. I got a kid. Like I'm even thinking when the kid comes on the way, like they're up all the time. You're tired. You're exhausted.
That's a thing.
But like, I know it's a thing. Everyone keeps telling me that, like I'm going to be exhausted, like toothpicks, holding my eyes open kind of thing. But that's just really my goal, is just to stay consistent in the word and just to keep seeking his face at the end of the day, because I just know I'm going to need that even more so as we're raising a son to continue on.
Dude, that's fantastic, man. I appreciate, like, I definitely am authentically putting you on the spot here. So I appreciate you, like, being open about it and talking through kind of what you've been thinking. Do you have any other thoughts for us on what this legacy thing means to us?
Man, I just think for the legacy aspect for me, it's just, continually following God, and just whatever I'm leaving behind, I hope it just points people back to Christ. Like that man, like 2 Timothy 4:7, I wrote down here, he fought the good and worthy fight. Mm-hmm. Like that's what I want people to say about me. Like, I know that's when we get to heaven, I ran a good race, I kept the faith, but like when I die and I pass away, I hope and I pray like that people say like, man, that guy was a fighter. Dude, he followed God with all of his heart, and that's all I can say about him.
It's really interesting because you're picking up that quote from 2 Timothy. Yeah. And 2 Timothy is most likely the last letter that Paul wrote. Yeah. And he probably wrote it understanding that he was about to be executed. Yep. So he probably actually knew, it's very likely he actually knew a date
Yep.
of like, I will live until this long.
Yeah.
And for him to say, I fought the good fight, essentially I persevered, I did what I was called to do. Like, what an incredible thing to say, with like knowing that it's true.
Yep.
And I think about Paul specifically. Obviously, we're not all Paul, but that dude was faithful to the call that God put on his life. And literally still, people are growing in their faith because of the things that he sat down and wrote. Sometimes it's hard to wrap your head around, especially if you've been in church for a long time.
Sure.
Where it's like, oh yeah, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Man, that's a great encouraging verse. Man, a real guy wrote that as he was going through real struggles and trials and issues. And that has encouraged people to work through their struggles and trials and issues over and over and over again throughout the ages. What a legacy. Yeah. And one of the craziest things about legacy that I actually do not love is that you have one whether you like it or not.
Yep.
And so it's really worth it to think through, what should my legacy be? And am I actually hitting the mark? Or are there things I need to adjust and things I need to change?
So good.
And so particularly as we strive to be good fathers, again, I recognize not everybody's a father, but God is the ultimate example to follow. I said at the top of this month that this was going to be the thread that we're chasing the whole time, and we're going to continue to chase it. Like, if you want to leave a strong fatherhood legacy, you want to use God as the ultimate example. He loves us. He cares for us. He provides for us. He pursues relationship with us. He disciplines us because he loves us and wants to draw us closer to himself. So good. And we want to strive to do that for our own kids. If you miss the mark, recognize the mistakes you made, pick it up and keep going. Continue to pursue a positive legacy built on a strong faith.
Love it.
Hey, I hope you appreciated this week. We're going to be back again next week. We'll be talking about what Colton already talked a little bit about, how to love your wife well and why that's a part of this fatherhood journey. We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to the Men of Iron podcast. If you enjoyed that episode, you can go to our website, menofiron.org. You can also like that episode. You can ring the notification bell, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. But again, thanks for listening to the Men of Iron podcast.